Hi, I'm Patty Blue Hayes, and I just kicked out a refugee from Honduras, and I don't feel guilty about it. So, this is kind of going to be a long story, and I wanted to share it for a couple reasons. One, I never in a million years thought that I would be that person to be so cold and callous as to kick someone out. Never mind someone who has nothing, and I was trying to help, and he was a refugee from Honduras. And two, because it's a really good lesson in perspective. And my dad always used to say that there's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. So here's my story. When I first moved to Panama 6 months ago, or actually, I'm sorry, this story even goes back a little further. When I visited Panama, I first met, let's call him Manuel. I first met Manuel when he was working outside doing some yard work, labor for a business owner. And there was something about him that just stood out to me. He had really kind eyes, and he was working hard. It's hot. He's raking up leaves, and he still had a smile, and he extended his hand to shake my hand. That's the first time I met him. When I moved to Panama 6 months ago, I stayed at a place that had him employed as a groundskeeper and someone who was taking care of different rooms that were available for guests. I didn't recognize him at first, and then it wasn't until maybe, 10 days into my stay that Manuel, kind of recognized me, and we made that connection, and I was really happy to see him, and that he'd gotten situated and had employment, and he had a place to live, and he had, food, and that he was, his basic needs were being met, and it seemed like a good situation for him. I saw him work really hard. He was definitely a hard worker, and the boss was, pretty much on him a lot, asking him, Manuel, do this, and Manuel, always kind of keeping him on task. Personally, I thought, wow, that's kind of a tough situation. I wouldn't want to be working where someone was just on me all the time, micromanaging or whatever, looking over your shoulder. And it's not like he had a lot of time off. I think he only had, one full day off, but he really couldn't leave the property because the owner wanted him there for security. So kind of, it was like a 24/7, you're always on or available kind of arrangement. And, you can easily burn out from that. And I think Manuel was getting a little bit burnt out. So I left, living there, and just went off to where I live now, this apartment in Coronado. And Manuel and I kept in touch, and he would just, talk about how things were getting more challenging and difficult, and he needed to leave, he needed to get out, it was time to move on. So I tried to help him. I gave him some contacts. He had an interview. I actually helped him leave, the place. I waited around the corner, and he came out, with his bags, and he was so relieved. And, we went to breakfast and kind of, just talked about the future for him, and that things were looking up, and he was going to be able to use his hospitality skills that he'd had. He had so many stories, right? Manuel had stories of working in New York, managing a factory, and then being in Mexico and being pressured into joining, a gang, and being mistaken for an FBI agent. He just had a ton of stories. And who knows whether they were true or not, but they were engaging and interesting, and he always had a story to tell. So he gets situated at this hotel that I put him in contact with the owner, and he was all set to be doing interacting with guests because he'd had experience in Roatan in at a hotel, and he would talk about guests that would ask for him, and guests that would give him huge tips, and just all these stories of people who were who found him very endearing, and I could see why. So about a week or so into his new gig at the hotel, he starts kind of sending messages like, people they're making fun of me, or how, just not things that are giving me an indication that things are going well, that's for sure. And he said that they were stealing his candy and stealing his papayas, and I chatted with the owner, and she said, there's video of him eating the papaya. Like, nobody's stealing a papaya. Like, he's, I don't know what he's talking about. And he quit. He left. I felt an enormous sense of responsibility for him. So this was really stressing me out. I really felt like I invested a lot of my time, my energy, my resources, my own money into him, and he was on my mind a lot. I would think about him, like, is he okay? Where is he gonna sleep? How's he gonna get money? How is he gonna get around to find transportation to get to a job, if he can get a job? And he wasn't a legal resident of the country, and was kind of working on getting some refugee status established. So it wasn't easy for him to actually get legal work. And so then there was another opportunity that came up that I advocated for him to stay in a rental apartment, not a caretaker's apartment. So here in Panama, there's if somebody lives on the grounds and is taking care of the property, it's usually a very, very modest, basic accommodation. So this was an actual rental apartment where he could stay and do the cleaning before and after guests were there, and just help guests with their bags, and things that I'd seen him do at the original place, and he was good at them, and he was friendly and engaging. So when he first got there, got him situated, we didn't have any guests, and I just said, take it easy, just relax, catch up on some sleep, go for a swim, just relax. Like, you need to decompress from everything that had been happening, because that's stressful, and he'd been staying at a bar where he was helping, stock things and clean up, and he'd done some hard construction type work for very little pay. And then we started getting, busier at the rentals, and things were going okay, for a minute. And then I was just noticing there would have to be a lot of supervision, and there were white towels that had been washed with a red blanket, and so then there were pink stained towels, and then I'd asked him not to lump wet towels together because of the smell, and I showed him the smell, like, see, doesn't this smell gross? That's what happens when wet things are just glopped together. And I would see piles of wood towels. And I would say, like, do you remember the conversation we had about not doing that because of the smell? And so then I ended up having to do a lot of laundry and a lot of like fixing the things that seemed to have gone wrong. And so, stressing me out because it's taking a lot of my time. And I would compare Manuel's work from where I originally met him to what he was doing now, and it just seemed so different. It's like he lost his mojo or something, It's like a switch just kind of turned off, and I was starting to notice like a little bit of eye rolling and like, yes, I said I'll do it, that kind of thing. And so at some point, I think, I would relay this information to the owner, and she decided that she wanted to combine the apartment that he was staying in with an adjoining apartment and try and rent that as one apartment, because she was noticing that there were requests for larger units. So I told him that, and that he had a week to find another situation, and I'd given him a lead, for like a restaurant job and some other thing, helping another friend of mine that I knew about. And we made a list of 6 things that he would agree to do before Friday, before he left. And we went over it, we read it together, he understood them, and I asked him to sign it. And one day I went over, because we had a quick turnaround on one of the units, and guests were going to be arriving in a couple hours, and the other guests had just checked out, so it's a quick turnaround, and it's not like we're running a Hilton hotel and have all the procedures in place to do it quickly. And I walked in, and I can't even tell you the disbelief that I was in. He's sitting on the bed in the bedroom watching television. The dryer is going. Both air conditioners are running in the bedroom and the living room. And the apartment stinks of fish. Like, it's gross. And it's clear that like the counters haven't been cleaned, the floor hasn't been cleaned, and I went to look under the sink at the garbage, and it was full, overflowing, like disgusting. And he told me that he'd already swept the floor and he'd already mopped the floor, and the floor wasn't damp, it didn't smell like the floor had been mopped, and I noticed broken glass on a shelf, like a beer bottle had broken. So obviously there was a big lack of attention to detail. And obviously he was lying to me that he'd done these things. And so, I was getting angry. Like I was really frustrated with him, and really getting angry, partly because I think I felt like he was taking advantage of me and my friendship and my kindness, because I'd seen the kind of work that he used to do. I knew he was capable of it, and it was kind of baffling, like, okay, so why isn't he doing this? I got him this situation that's a pretty sweet deal, which was only supposed to be temporary. And also then I never really saw him making efforts to find anything else. He didn't really follow up on the leads for other jobs that I'd told him about, and agencies that he could call that might be able to help him. So, I think I was doing a little bit of a dance of like, okay, I have to step back. I can't force someone to do things, for himself. I can't feel too responsible for that. So, but it kind of pissed me off to see him just like, watching television, oh, but I'm waiting for the laundry to dry. I'm like, okay, well, if we didn't have a guest checking in a couple hours, I could understand that, right? Taking a break, sitting down, resting, it's hot. But we had people checking in within hours, and, you'd think like that's the time to like be busy, right? Like, sweep, mop, wipe down things, get that garbage out of there. That's the first thing that should have been done. And so, that was frustrating and disappointing, obviously. And then, just little things kept just kind of going awry. I had washed curtains, asked him to hang them up. He hung them all backwards with, the tags facing into the bedroom on all of them. I think there were like 10 curtains, and they were consistent with the tags, facing into the room. And so I asked him if he could please, put them back so that the tags are facing in. Like, oh, well, I don't know if I can get the ladder again, and just kind of like these excuses. So a couple days ago, I had to go to the property. The cable guy was coming, the air conditioning guy was coming, and so I needed to be there to meet them, and I just wanted to see how the progress was going on the list of 6 or 7 things that he said that he would do before leaving. And I get there and he's not around, but I see that his things are there, so he's probably not too far away. I sent him a text because I noticed that nothing on the list was done. There were still cobwebs on the ceiling, and then there was more of a mess. Like, he was kind of like the character Pigpen in the Snoopy cartoons, the Charlie Brown cartoons. It just seems like everywhere he went, there was like more of a mess. One of the apartments had been cleaned, but he was using it, and there was like grease like splattered all over the stove. And then there was debris all over the floor because the window had been open and all the like leaves and stuff had flown in. And this was already an apartment that was already cleaned. So now there's like more of a mess that has to be cleaned. The apartment where he was staying in was, really needed a deep cleaning, and he was supposed to do that before leaving. But, we're kind of like running out of time. I sent him a text to please, come back and like get started on the stuff that he'd agreed to do. And he showed up, and he said that he'd been helping people just up the path in their house. And I'm really confused. Like, why are you helping somebody else when your agreement is to do the work here because you're staying for free in a rental apartment and basically doing part-time work? I mean, it was not full-time at all. There was not a lot that was required of him. And, he just was kind of like, but I need money and, whatever. And I said, well, your first obligation is to this place. When these chores and tasks get done, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want to do in your free time. But these are the things that needed to get done. All right, miss, well, let me go finish up with them and I'll come back. No, what? You need to go tell them that you can't work for them until you're finished with your original commitment, your original obligation. That's what the arrangement is. So it was just really, like, I'm really having a hard time understanding how he can not see the messes that are around him, the shorter amount of time that he's going to have to do all these things, and the like the lack of responsibility to doing what he said he was going to do. And I felt like then I had to supervise him like he was a child, standing over him just like the former boss had done. And I literally, found myself like saying, like, Manuel, what are you doing? You've got to do this. You've got to, Manuel. I became that person. I became the boss that was, standing over him, and, like he had experienced before, and that I thought was so awful. Like, oh God, I can't believe somebody would, treat another person like this. And then I'm doing it. So I actually had to go over to the other person's house and let them know, because apparently they didn't know that, look, he can start work for you on Saturday, like that's totally fine, but he's got an arrangement where he's living for free in exchange for doing certain work, and it's not getting done, and here he is, polishing up your stove, but the one in the apartment, where he is covered in grease. So they were apologetic, and I was definitely in like full-on bad mood bitch mode. Like, I wasn't happy. Like, this is taking up my time, and I've got stuff to do, and the woman was nice and trying to strike up conversation, and I'm just like, I can't even engage in conversation. I'm just in a really bad mood, and I'm sweating, like my bra was like soaked from just the sweat. It's hot in Panama. And and who knows what, he had been telling them, right? Who knows the story that he came up with to tell these new people, where, he was welcomed into their home, and he's working hard, being very polite. And so who knows what the story was that they heard. This is important for later. So, grumpy me, I'm following him back to the apartments, and I, make sure he's clear, very clear on what has to get done that day. I think it was like sweeping and mopping one or two of the apartments, de-webbing the ceiling, and maybe rehanging the curtains if he could get a ladder to use. And I went upstairs, and probably for like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before I got notice that the cable guy finally arrived. And so I hurried downstairs and was going to head out to the parking lot to meet the cable guy, when what do I see but Manuel in the pool chatting with the guy who lives in the house where he had just been cleaning their stove. Now, he's in full conversation with the man, and he's just leaning, on the edge of the pool, like they're just full on engaged in conversation. This is not oh, it's hot and I'm going to take a quick dip and splash back out and get back to work. No, this is full on lounging in the pool like they've been golfing buddies for years, and they're just gonna, sip a beer and have a chat. And I didn't even have time to process my incredulity, because I had to go meet the cable guy. I'm waiting for the cable guy, and come back, toward the apartments, and I do notice that now all of Manuel's belongings are packed. So he's got a suitcase packed, he's got the reusable grocery bags, those are packed. Everything's, packed up. But he's not there. And after I dealt with the cable guy, I went back up toward the house where the people were that, he'd been working for. And I asked them, oh, have you seen Manuel? I think he went to get some food. Like, oh, okay, thanks. And sure enough, he came back with, a bag. And at this point, I'd also been, communicating with the owner, and, we were just, it was just too clear, like, this is done today, like, I'm sorry, but how many times can we go over this, what you've agreed to, what you're not doing, and then to just be swimming, and swimming is fine, right? Time off is fine. I'm all for that. But not when, 3, 4, 5 times I've had to go over like the work that needs to get done, and yeah, I'm all about taking breaks and cooling off and refreshing, but not slacking off, avoiding responsibility, and completely abandoning jobs that you agree to do. So at this point, I had just kind of reached the end of my rope, and the owner had said, yeah, like, just this is not working. And when he got back to the apartment, I just said, I don't know what's going on, but clearly you're not able to meet the responsibilities that you have here, and it's time for you to go. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't care. I mean, this was such a shock to me because I'd cared so much about him and his well-being for so long, and honestly, it just felt so strange to be so disconnected and like kind of cold and heartless. I'm still really processing all of this because it's just such an odd thing. I never thought that I could be so callous. I never thought that I could kind of cut off my concern or my care for someone's well-being seemingly as quickly as I did with Manuel. So, I mean, that's something for me to kind of, process and try and understand. But I do know that he, has friends, and he's had places to stay in the interim when he's had, when he's not had employment. But still, it was just very strange to be so, cut off. And then I was walking down the stairs. So, he left, shook my hand, God bless you, miss. And he left, and I guess the owner of that other house was in the pool, saw him leave, with all his things, and I'm sure Manuel said, well, I've been asked to leave. And I guess I'd been upstairs, and when I was coming downstairs, the man yelled up, from the pool, so angry at me and in disbelief that I would, kick him out. You made him leave? He just went to get food. He has no place to go. And, really mad at me, and I totally understand why, right? Because if you look at at just the visuals of that, yeah, makes sense. Bitchy woman, telling, the Honduran refugee he's got to pack up and leave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But there was so much more to the story that led up to that event. And that's where, the whole perception thing comes in, because I know how it looks on the outside. But that's not entirely the truth of the experience, and yet I'm also well aware that, this is only my story. There is the Manuel story, and there is the complete, objective, factual story, but we don't ever really get that because we all have our own filters and perceptions, and our brains are just these massive computers, sifting through data and connecting things, and it's really complex. So anyway, that's my story of kicking out a refugee from Honduras and not feeling any remorse. And that was a few days ago, and I still don't feel any remorse. Very strange. But if you've had anything similar happen to you, I'd be curious to hear about it, or what your thoughts are on my experience.